Welcome to the Cup of Joe Show, where we explore the journey of recovery from alcohol and drug addiction. One story, one conversation, and one step at a time. I'm your host, Joe, creating a safe space for honest discussions about the challenges and triumphs of addiction and alcoholism. In each episode, we'll hear inspiring stories and uncover tools that make healing possible. Sobriety is not a one-size-fits-all journey, and you don't have to face it alone. Recovery is possible, and it's worth it. Thank you for joining the Cup of Joe Show. Now let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Cup of Joe Show. I'm your host, of course, Joe. And before we get started, I just want you to know if you are struggling right now, you are not alone. Please don't suffer in silence. Today's guest is my friend Tim R. Sober since January 1st, 2019. He's a husband, a father in a blended family of 8, and a proud grandfather who recently made the big move from Sacramento to Knoxville, Tennessee. After thinking he could do it on his own, stepping away from the structure that once saved his life, Tim found himself with a reason to drink again. But when 45 men from his home group showed up for him in more ways than one, he came back, took a white chip, and rediscovered a love for sobriety. Tim knows without a shadow of a doubt that for him to drink is to die, physically, mentally, and spiritually. I'm really looking forward to learning about Tim's story, so grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's get into it. How you doing today, Tim?
Amazing. If it gets any better, I'm going to need background music.
Oh, well, if I had some, I'd play it for you, brother. So what was it like growing up, Tim?
Well, for me, it was I grew up in a broken home. I have an older brother. He's a couple years older than me. His name is Charles. I have a younger brother named Andrew. And I, grew up with my mom. She was a single parent. She tried to, raise us the best she could. A lot of the times, she wasn't always, the best at pointing us in the right direction. My mom, she got married at a Grateful Dead concert, so my life involved, there was a lot of pot smoking and drugs and alcohol at home, so, growing up for me was, it was good. We lived next door to my aunt and my uncle, and they had 4 kids. So I had my cousin Michael, who me and him are the same age. So he caused a lot of mischief, and his older brother, one of his older brothers, Patrick, had he had a newspaper route. And so me and my older brother would help Patrick, and Michael would go too. We'd all go and go around the neighborhood and deliver papers, so yeah, that was pretty cool. It was a good time, growing up in the 80s in Sacramento, back when you could ride in the back of the truck, and we'd go down to the lake a lot. Our family would throw parties, and it was a good Irish Catholic mix, on my aunt's side. Her and her family were Irish Catholics, and so whenever they threw parties, me and Michael, we'd always help them clean up afterwards. But we'd take sips out of the solo cups, so that everybody left behind. So we'd get a little tipsy.
I was going to say, it was the old red Solo cups. I don't know if they still use those today, but man, I sure remember them. Geez.
Yeah, those were good times. We lived right next door to each other, so we had a gate that went from our backyard to theirs. So, it was just one big party when we were younger. But, it was after that my mom had left my little brother's dad, and things kind of took a turn. My mom started, bringing home guys or going out with guys that weren't necessarily, great father figures in our lives, and I used to drive my mom's husband around. I was probably 10 years old at the time. My mom had this old Chevy Chevette, and I would drive her husband around while he would rob paper bean machines. He would take all the coins out of them, and he would keep the quarters and the dimes and give me all the nickels. So for helping him. So I was an accomplice. I didn't even know it. But, um, you know, it was around that time I was still trying to figure myself out as a young man. And, not having a father figure there was tough. Um, I had a buddy of mine that used to come from Tallahassee, Florida to Sacramento, and we would hang out all summer. He would come out there for the summer, and we would hang out all summer. His mom lived nearby. And one night we were at the donut shop. We used to go to this donut shop up the road, and we'd go there like 4 in the morning, and we'd get a donut, and I'd get chocolate milk, and he would get a donut and some orange juice. Well, they were closed, and so I looked in at the bottom of the door, and I seen there was a set of keys there. And so I went over to this car, and I'm a smart young man, so I went over to this car and I broke off the antenna and made a hook at the end, pulled the keys out, opened the door. We went in. I grabbed a donut, my chocolate milk. He grabbed a donut and this orange juice, and I left some money on the counter. Um, but that's where, like, a normal kid wouldn't have done that, like, but me, I had to take it to the extremes, and I ended up, there was a donut truck in the parking lot. And I'm like looking at the key, and I'm looking at the truck, and I'm like, oh. So I go over there and I lock the door, and I steal the donut truck. Well, the back of this thing's full of donuts. And so I ended up selling the donuts, part of them, right? And I gave some away, gave a lot of them away. But I used it for gas money because I had it for a little while. And the second or third day, I think I had this donut truck. I didn't know what to do with it, right? So then it was raining one night, and I took it for a little spin across the school soccer field, and I was doing donuts, and I got stuck. I had a buddy come pull me out of there.
Wait a minute, you're doing donuts in the donut
Yeah, I'm
truck?
doing donuts in the donut truck, and I got stuck, and so I had a buddy of mine come help me pull it out. Right, so right after I get done pulling this thing out of there, um, a buddy of mine calls me and he wants to go for a ride. So I take him for a ride. Well, next thing I know, I got red and blue lights behind me. And my first thought was to jump on the interstate. And so I jumped on the interstate, and I took the cops on the chase through like 5 different counties. It didn't end well, and it ended up with us being in a lot of trouble. That was my first run in with the law, and being in trouble like that. I was scared, didn't know what was going to happen. And, at after doing 3 months in juvenile hall, and not knowing what was going to happen, they let me out. But they had me on probation, and I had to do like I had to do work project. So every weekend I was washing cop cars or covering up graffiti along the freeway, and I did that for a while. I think it was like 72 days I had to do, and from there, I wasn't drinking a bunch. I was doing narcotics. I was smoking pot, but I wasn't really drinking a whole bunch at that time. Um, but soon after that, I met some friends while I was there incarcerated in that juvenile hall, and they weren't really good influences to hang out with. So I found once I started taking drinks with, hanging out with those kind of people. Um, it just escalated from there. My alcoholism really took off. And that's all I wanted to do was drink and get high. And um, I was in and out of relationships um, in my teens, my later teens. Um, thank God I had a job where, my employer, he was just as screwed up as I was, but we somehow functioned, and were able to make money. So, I didn't lose my job, that first job I had at this place. But, you know, uh, up until that point, I really, after that that first point of being in trouble with the law, I really didn't get in any more trouble with the law, but my alcoholism took off. And I did get it. My first DUI, I got my first DUI when I was 22. And by the time I was 22, I had 4 kids. Um, and so, which I was barely, in their lives right at that time. Um, I was present, but I wasn't present. I was spending too much time, trying to figure out, how I was going to drink or use, and being in and out of jail. And when I was 24, I got in trouble and was looking at quite a few years in prison. And the judge was pretty much tired of seeing me walking in and out of his courtroom, you know. And he said, we're going to lock you up and throw away the key this time." And something something changed for me when he said that. And I was honest with the judge. I told him that um, I had a problem and I didn't know how to get help. And I don't know what said that. That wasn't Tim talking. That was something else that made me say that. And he said, "We're going to let you go to this program. And if you screw this up, this 6-month program, if you screw this up, you're going to go to prison." And so I ended up going to the Salvation Army in Sacramento. I went through the Salvation Army program, rehabilitation program. And I was, when I was there at the program, like, you went to church every Sunday. They did church on Wednesday nights, and you pretty much worked for free at their, facilities. And I graduated that program. I completed it, and I really meant, you know, to stay sober when I got out of that program. But that's not what happened. Once again, I told myself, like, I'm not going to drink, I'm not going to use, I'm not going to go back to that old lifestyle. And once again, I found myself, beer in hand, um, doing the same things. And I knew where AA was at this time. I had been, court ordered to go there quite a few times throughout my, younger years. And just, I would just go there just to get a court card signed, and really wasn't focused on doing too much of the work. I just wanted to get some of that, get the people off my back. And but I had went to a not too long after that. I went to an AA meeting, and I ran into a good friend of mine, that I went to high school with, um, and I told him I wanted to hang out with him, and he said we couldn't hang out because I was still up to the old ways. And tough guy like myself, broke my heart. It really did. And because I thought we were friends, I thought we were brothers. And little did I know that he was being a brother to me at that time, because what he said to me was that, you need to get right, you know, and once again, I had that thought, like, you need to stop doing what you're doing, and you need to get sober, and be serious about it. And I started going to AA, on a regular basis. I got a sponsor. I started working the steps, and not too long after that, I moved from Sacramento to SoCal, Southern California. And I moved down there because I met somebody online. It was back when MySpace was a thing. And I had met this girl on there, and I seen that one of her books that she liked to read was the Big Book. And but I moved down to SoCal, and life was going pretty good. I was going to meetings regularly. I was being of service, going to conventions. I know that when I first moved down there, I went to this men's retreat, and I was talking to one of the guys that was doing registration, and he's like, he was sitting there listening to me, and I'm pretty sure I was still kind of out of my mind a little bit. Um, and he hollered over at one of his sponsees, and he said, "Gary, get a hold of this guy. He's just like you, you know." Like, and Gary came over, man. He put his arm around me, and we were best friends from day one. And mm, you know, friends like that, man, are just really hard to come by. He was there no matter what. He listened to all the crazy thoughts that were my alcoholic mind was thinking. And, but it was about um, 9 years in after living down here. I got married to my fiance. I asked her to marry me, and we got married, and then we had some troubles and went through a divorce um, in 2017, 18. Um, and I thought that my program was going pretty strong. You know, I thought I had a good program, solid program, and I moved to Utah for a little bit to get away. Um, I moved out there with my sister and my brother-in-law and their kids, and when I did that, I got connected. I was going to meetings out there, and it's a little different in Utah. You don't have your tribe with you, right? I still had my tribe back home, and but you know, when it came against that defense, against that first drink, man, like I was in all this pain that I wasn't dealing with. I wasn't telling anybody about. Like I'm a tough guy, I can handle it. But the reality is that I needed to be open and honest. I wasn't willing to be open and honest about what was going on inside, what I was thinking, and what my alcoholic mind was thinking. And it was not too long. It was about probably 4.5 months in, and I started drinking with the guys after work in the shop. I seen them having beers and hanging out. I was like, yeah, I can have a beer. And I started drinking, and then it progressively got worse. Started drinking every night, drinking and riding my Harley, um, drinking at work because I smell alcohol on my boss's breath at 7 in the morning. So I was like, oh, it's okay to drink, at work too. I'll drink at work. But it progressively got worse for me. And I was talking to some of the guys in my home group meeting back home in SoCal, and they were getting concerned, right? And one of them actually called me up and he said, "You know what? I know your coordinates." He goes, "Oh, I will come get you." He pretty much threatened me, right? But sometimes that's what I need, like.
Yeah, I understand that.
so So you know what? And I thought about it when they said that. I'm like, these guys, like, I was like, I gotta get sober again, And it was New Year's Eve, and I went to this place, um, and I took a couple people with me, and I knew they had to get home safe. I wanted them to have a good time, but I knew that they had to get home safe. So I stayed sober, and I took them home. And as soon as I took them home, I went to my sister's house and I went to sleep. I woke up the next morning, and I went and rented a 24-foot U-Haul. I put both my Harleys and all my stuff in there, and I drove my butt back to Sacramento, or back to SoCal. And it was like the next day or a couple days later, I walked into that Minstag, my home group, and I took a newcomer chip, and it was one of the most satisfying things in my recovery. You know, to show the new guy, right, like, and myself that I'm worth it, right? And two is that it was to show myself that I needed this. And I tell you, man, like I felt a weight lifted off my back when I walked in there and took that newcomer chip. I felt relieved, like I finally had the monkey off my back one more time. But I also knew that, like, I had to take this portion of my sobriety seriously. You know what I mean? And I figured out by getting a sponsor. I got a new sponsor, and instantly started working the steps with this guy. Um, and I got to get some relief. Um, working the steps and being able to believe in a power greater than myself better than I ever had. You know, knowing that God was there with me through that whole time, because there was moments, you know, when I was living in Utah, like I got in an accident. You know, I crashed my Harley and I flew off a mountain, and I pretty much escaped that incident with a little bit of road rash and like a scrape on my knee. You know, and I had no riding gear on whatsoever. Um, you know, I lost my little brother probably a few years back before all this, but and I had a picture of him in my glass case on my Harley at the time, you know, and I believe that, you know, him and God were there, you know, and they protected me from dying or getting hurt worse than
Yeah.
what I already did, you know. So, but so you know, I started to put the pen to paper, and the magic started happening. The magic started happening for me. And I was about a couple months back from living in Utah when my sister that I was living with, she committed suicide. And um you know, I got to walk through that sober, um up until my up until that point in my life, you know, today, even today, like that's one of the hardest things I've ever had to walk through in my life sober, besides losing my best friend Gary too. I lost my best friend Gary. um he died of a fentanyl overdose, um after I got back from Utah as well, you know. And so having those two things happen, but the point I want to make about that is that those two things that I've had to you know, I've got to walk through sober. um I've got to process, you know, I've gotten to process that, you know, and deal with it in a healthy way, you know, instead of an unhealthy way by holding those feelings in, right, and not talking about it with others, and not putting the pen to paper and not figuring out, you know, why it hurt me, and and how to be okay with it, you know. So, you know, yeah, we recently, I met my wife shortly after I moved back from Utah. um and you know, I didn't know she was going to be my wife when I met her, you know, and I had known her parents for a while, and I didn't even know they had a daughter, you know. I was like, but there was this, I walk out of this AA meeting, and there's this angel just standing there by her car in the parking lot, you know, and we hit it off. And, you know, she's my best friend. She's one of the greatest people on this planet. You know, her parents are good people. I've known them for a while too. And you know, I've gotten really lucky to be in her life, and we have two beautiful kids um, together. And then she's got two other kids from another marriage, but those two other girls are, you know, they're not just my stepkids; they're my daughters too. You know, we have a beautiful blended family, and those are the gifts, man, of sobriety today. You know, yeah, what a
You know,
beautiful life.
you said something that was, I think, really telling. You said, you know, I got relief from doing the 12 steps, and you know that's the key, because you know we're looking for relief. That's why, you know, that's why I drank and did drugs, and I was looking for relief. You know, I had no solution. I couldn't get peace of mind. You know, and I thought this was it, this temporary oblivion. I thought that was peace. You know, I mean,
Mhm.
is insane. It's just an insane thing to think about. And I think it's amazing that you know you start working the steps again in a different, see things in a different way. You have such, you know, that tragic loss of your sister and of your friend.
Mhm.
You're able to um walk through that sober, which is, and that's it's It's a miracle, for people
Yeah.
like us, you know,
She
it's
was
a
my favorite
miracle.
sister too. She was my favorite sister. You're not
Yeah.
supposed to have favorites, but she was my favorite.
Other sisters and brothers, we are not, you can't hear that part. I'll cut it out. No, we're close to people, and some people mean a lot to us, and yeah, my old sponsor Mike, he always said, if you stay sober long enough, you will lose people you love, and it's just a fact of life. And but like you did, hopefully we'll be able to walk through that sober, which is
Absolutely.
a whole nother deal. So, um, what was the hardest part of getting sober?
I think the hardest part about getting sober was realizing Tim had a problem with alcohol. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe that I thought that I was capable of, putting it down. But there was moments where I would tell myself, like, I'd get out of jail, I'd be like, okay, the liquor store is right there across the street. I'm not going over there. I'm not going over there. But drink in hand, and there I was. You know, that was a hard part in my life to stop picking up. You know, and when I picked up, I couldn't put it down. Like I would just drink until I caused havoc. No matter where I went, when I would show up to parties, people would be like, "Oh God, Tim's here." You know. And it wasn't because I was ugly. It was just because I would drink and then I would become ugly. That's why. So yeah.
We bring the chaos wherever we go. Yeah, we think we're so delusional. We think like, I'm okay. I'm not so bad. Yeah.
I was pretty bad. I've had people tell me from my younger years, like, I'm so glad you're sober, you know,
Yeah.
like, and these are people that don't understand what AA is about or anything. They're normies, but they're like, man, whatever you're doing, keep doing it because the world's a lot better place with you being sober, So yeah.
So what were some of the biggest lessons you learned like early on in recovery?
You know that I can't fix other people. Because when I found out what sobriety was about and had like a taste of it, um, some of the people that I hung out with, I wanted them to experience it too, but I couldn't. I was there. I had to do it for me. I mean, I could tell them about it, and they could see what it was like, right, by seeing how different I was. But if they weren't willing to do it, then I was just wasting my breath, you know.
Yeah, that's the hard part too, I think, Tim, is, people like us, especially the ones who could use a different solution,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not, they haven't reached that point where they're willing to do something different. And man, we're heartbreaking. We are some heartbreaking people, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Um, but we keep trying, and you set a great example, man. You really do. I mean, I I've enjoyed getting to know you, over the last several months, and you definitely set the example. So I think that's really cool. How, if I can ask, you said you had four children early. I mean, you were young when you had.
I was 15 when I had my first kid.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how's your relationship with them? In recovery.
It is they know that I'm in recovery. They know I'm sober. My oldest daughter is 31 and she's experienced trouble with she's had some issues in her life, right, with drinking and using. And not to the point that I had, but when she did have those troubles though, she knew where to come. And she called me up and asked me, she expressed what was going on. She explained what's going on, and and I told her, I just pretty much pointed her in the right direction, and she was able to go get help. And she started going to AA meetings, and she found some cool people to hang out with and connected with them. And she's turned her life around, you know, that's God, you know, that's a miracle in itself, you know. And, I have, it's, because I wasn't there when back in the days, when I was too busy running and gunning, like, it put a little, it put strain on me and my son's relationship. Um, like we're not on talking terms, you know, it's been that way for quite some time, but, I'm really hopeful, and I have faith that one day it's going to turn around, you know, I don't get depressed about it anymore. I've done the work on that too. I've done the writing on that too. And that's key, and you touched on that too. Like getting that stuff out, because if I let that stuff sit up here in my head, it's going to fester, right? It's going to fester, and the devil's going to grab a hold of it, and he's going to use it to the best of his ability, right? To get me to go out again. And I'm not letting that happen, So I'm going to do what it takes to not let that happen,
Yeah.
So,
And that's, we talk about acceptance, and that's a hard, acceptance of, gee, I'm sitting in traffic is one thing. Acceptance of, I've got to be patient and just keep doing the next right thing. And hopefully these relationships will turn around someday if I continue moving forward. And that's a whole nother level.
yeah.
It's a whole
Yeah.
nother level. And you said something about your mind. So tell the audience what you say about your mind. I love what you say about it.
So I'm typically walking around with I got crime scene tape wrapped around my forehead all the time. It's a crime scene up there. And I used to not tell people what's going on because they would just like freak out sometimes. They'd be like, "Oh my God." And but if you get around people that are, cut from the same cloth and understand you, and they have empathy, and they care, they want to see you grow, right, spiritually. And then, like I've had those people that I can share those things with, and the more I share them, like the less power they have, that's the cool thing, right? And I have a couple guys, man. I have a guy that I just met over here in Tennessee at this new meeting, and I call him on a basis like a couple times a week, and we talk, and I'll shoot some stuff at him, and he'll be like, "Yeah, hey, so I get it," and he shares some stuff with me, he'll be like, "Oh, this is what I do when I'm, in that, in that, in that thinking stage, or when I'm thinking those things, or whatever, the case may be." But and like today, he told me, put the devil behind you, like you're walking in front of him, like he ain't running the show, you are. Like, and I when I closed my eyes for a brief second, I pictured it. It took all that power away from them, and it gave me the power back, like to make the choice to be like, we're having a positive, great day today, right? And it has been, dude. It's crazy because it works. It works. When you meditate on it, meditation is something that's became it's becoming part of my deal. I believe in it. Where I didn't believe in it. I'm like, yeah, I don't need to meditate. Like that's crazy, right? That's for you older guys, that have time to do all that stuff. No, you need to make time to do that. I
Yeah.
believe in it. I believe it's helped me absolutely tremendously by pulling that crime scene tape. It's helped me pull that crime scene tape off my forehead to where it's not such a battlefield up there anymore, you know, and talking about it. So,
No, that's, I had a old sponsor, Matt. I had no idea about meditation. I mean, it was like, it was a foreign thing to me. And I was like, I, it's for those other old guys, not this old guy, and, he said, "Oh, okay." He said, "Why don't we start a meditation meeting?" And I was like, "I just told you, I have no idea how to meditate." But we started a meeting, and we did an 11-step meeting for a couple of years on a Friday night, and I remember when he said, okay, he said we had this, kind of wrote out how we were gonna do it, and he said we're gonna sit quiet, and we'll have kind of lead meditation for 20 minutes, and I was like, whoa,
Right.
20 minutes. I was like, shouldn't we start out at 2? you know And he was like, no, we're going to start at 20 minutes. And I remember the first couple times that I did it, man, I was so it just was like I couldn't stand myself. I just couldn't just sit still. I was like just so fidgety, and it just was so uncomfortable. And but after practicing, and that's the one thing about recovery, I think, is it's a practice, and we forget that it is practicing.
I
And
agree.
but after a while, that sitting 20 minutes, became like it made sense, because it takes 5 minutes to really just kind of settle the mind, and then another 10 minutes of really being quiet, and another 5 minutes of kind of coming back out of it. And he always would say, when you get these thoughts, he said, just pretend it's like you're on a lazy river, and just push those thoughts down the lazy river. And it was just little things like that just changed my life. So I'm glad you talked about that.
There's this guy, John Hopkins, and he made this meditation song, or meditation story. It's on Apple Music, and you can look it up. John Hopkins, "Sit by the Fire." It's one of my favorites to listen to. Um, and it talks about having an ember that you fan into a fire, and it's really cool. If you guys, anybody listen to this, or even you check it out, like it's a really cool meditation story. So that's what I go to most times, especially when I'm driving.
I'll put that. I'll put a link to that on in the podcast, so
Huh?
people will be able to check it out as well. So um, here's one for you. I was thinking, Tim, like, what does surrender mean to you?
Surrender to me is more than just waving the white flag. Which, when you come from where I come from, you know, uh, um, it's not easy to do. It's not something it seems unattainable to surrender. Like, we don't give up. And if you look at the profile picture on my contact when you call me, it's a stork trying to swallow a frog, right? But the frog is choking the stork, and it says across the top, never give up. And I've had to look at that and really, you know, make some decisions, like, on what is it that I'm giving up, you know? Um, but to me, giving up is, or surrendering is I'm surrendering those old ways, you know. Um, that's when I'm waving the white flag to, you know. I got to give up those old ways, and how I do that, like, so a little bit earlier, I was talking about, the devil trying to come in and take over my thoughts, and if I'm not treating the kids right, if I'm not treating my wife right, if I'm not treating my friends right, right, um, I have to recalibrate, and sometimes I have to surrender whatever I feel like I'm not getting, whatever I feel like, I'm offended by, or, maybe something my wife said, like, oh, you spilled a little bit of ketchup sauce on the side of the trash can, and you didn't clean it up. whatever it may be, like just, for me, it's it's part of the journey to smile and sometimes give her a kiss and or just love on the kids a little extra, be more loving. And because that's hard for me. I didn't get that when I was a kid. I wasn't shown those things. And here at 47 years old, I'm learning more and more every day how to do those things better, and be better at doing that, instead of just trying, right? I need to be better at doing those things instead of just trying. So I got to surrender the old ways, because there's no value in them. There's no value.
No, and I think you put that wonderfully, man. You really did. It's like surrendering the old ways, and because that's and it's a theme that's kind of come up several times, and it's just been on my mind, a lot. So for anyone who's listened to the podcast and heard me say this before, I'm sorry, but it just literally, it's like, uh, as we work the steps and as we recover and we do these things, you're talking about your childhood, and we get a new childhood. We get to look at things differently, or we get to change how we react to life, you know, which is could be the opposite of what we were taught or what we learned growing up. Which is all this stuff is just it's powerful stuff,
Hmm.
you know,
Hmm.
really powerful. Um, so I yeah, hug your kids more. I love it.
Hug
Hug
'em.
your kids
Hug
more.
'em, even when they irritate you, because they're going to, right? I'm sure I wasn't the greatest. My mom tells me she's like, you were a great kid. You entertained yourself, like, you know, um, but I'm sure I was a handful, no doubt. So,
You a handful?
oh yeah.
Donut truck man? No. um, so how do you define success in recovery today?
Success in recovery today. I would, I would say I had an old sponsor of mine that used to ask me every time I called him, "What'd you do for your sobriety today?" And I'm like, "Well, I talked to a newcomer. Um, I was able to be of service to him, or you know, I held open the door for somebody at the store, to show that um, there's still humanity out there." And he'd chuckle, and so I think by getting out of myself, um, and being a service. I think that those are important things. Like that's a good question. It's a good question. So,
Um, yeah, I mean, those are it's the simple things, like you said. It's we do these simple things, we do these, and I like how you said to show people that humanity is still good. There is still a lot of good in the world, and we can bring it. You
well,
know.
I mean, and staying sober, right? Like staying sober for one second, 1 minute, one moment, one day. Like that's a victory. You know.
We are victorious today, Tim.
Because there was
Oh,
days where I couldn't, like I remember that, and there's days where people can't, you know. Um, so
so what does your spirituality look like today? Like, what's your relationship with a higher power like?
um it's like it's evolving, right? It's always evolving. So when I was younger, um, I had my uncle. He was dating this gal, and she would like take me to church with her. I'd be like, oh, I want to go with you. And I had no idea what church was about, or I didn't have like a understanding of God at that time, right? Um, but there was things that happened in my life that I knew there was a higher power there protecting me, because there's no other way to describe it. You know, um, between car crashes, being in gunfights, being shot at, multiple things that had happened in my life. Um, there's no doubt in my mind that there was a higher power there with me, when I look back and I reflect, right, and I'm looking at all this stuff that I'd been through in my life, um, there was absolutely a higher power there with me, standing there with me, protecting me. And when I crashed on my Harley, and I had that picture of my little brother, in there, it was then too that I reflected on that, and I could see where he showed up again, you know. Um, so there was those types of things that had happened in my life, have kept me kind of um, kept me intrigued about it, right? About my higher power. And so, you know, I was living with my brother a little bit before I moved to SoCal from Sacramento, and it was towards the end of my running. And he said, if you're going to live in my house, because I was homeless, I didn't really have anywhere to go at the time. I was couch surfing or whatever. But he said, if you're going to live in my house, you're going to go to church with us, because he went to church every Sunday. He was, um, that's the way he ran his house. And so I would go to church with them, and I couldn't, like I would. There was sometimes I would sit there and listen to the music or whatever, and I would just start crying. And I'm like, what's going on with me? Like, here I am, this um, badass, right? Like, bulletproof guy, and I'm just like sitting here crying up over a song. But what it was like, it was God nudging me, and telling me to listen up. And um and so, I would read the Bible here and there, and go to church. And the more I learned, I was like intrigued about it, about my relationship with God, outside you know of just going to AA, right? But um I know without a doubt, like, he's like a father figure to me. you know he nudges me, he tells me, like, when I'm not treating my kids right, or my wife right, or somebody right, like, he nudges me, and I get that nudge to, like, make it right, or do things differently. And you know there's no greater love, really, than, when I reflect and look back, like, he's shown me so much grace, you know what I mean, and love in my life. And my grandmother, God rest her soul, she she was always one that would send me birthday cards with, like, you know, different psalms, or, just quotes out of the Bible. And, I always kind of found that, like, when I was younger, I'd be like, oh, grandma sent me another, psalm reading, or some, some biblical text, right? And, you know, now that she's gone, and it's like I cherish those moments. I cherish those. I find myself going back and reading them again. And one cool thing about my grandmother, she sent me some fudge one time with some scripture written on it. And it was in this box. It was in this small box. And she wrote a note to the mailman. It said, postman, please make sure my grandson, my favorite grandson, gets this package. Right? She has like 40 grandkids, right? But I'm her favorite. And she said, make sure my grandson gets this package, because I don't want to have to come hunt you down. She knew how much I loved her fudge, right? And I love getting her scriptures. And this was towards the end of the latter years of my life, and that I got to experience with her. But Yeah, it was so cool, man. Like I was like, oh, I love my grandmother. Like she nailed it for me. She knew me. She knew me. So
Now we know where you got it from, Tim. Now we know where you got it from.
she
Yeah.
was a God fearing woman, you know.
Yeah.
She raised 9 kids by herself, man, and she loved Jesus, and she wasn't afraid to tell anybody about it. So yeah.
Oh, that's really cool, man. And so, what would you say to maybe someone who's out there listening who might be feeling hopeless? You know,
You know, I I'm reflecting on back when I felt hopeless, um, when I didn't have anywhere to turn and I was living on the streets and um, didn't know what to do. Um, I would just say, grab a hold of this program. Like get into a treatment center, um, and grab onto that higher power. You know, and you'll be able to build, a life beyond your wildest dreams. No doubt, and you'll gain hope, right? Um, the longer you stay sober, absolutely. Like yeah, that's a good question, Joe.
well, I thought that was a pretty good answer, Tim. You know, um, what's your favorite recovery tool? Like, what's your go-to?
My go-to is, I would say, going to meetings. I mean, because when I got here, right, I didn't know anybody. And so when I looked up, I had this app that I look up these meetings on, and I found this one meeting, and I went to it, and it was a lot of older people. I didn't really connect with a bunch of people there, or feel like I fit in, But I know that I'm new, right? So I know that it's going to take some time, but I did see this guy. I walked up to this guy Paul, right, who I would never, like hang out with, on the streets, but and I knew that, but I was like, this guy's probably he's gonna know where a good meeting is. And I walked up to this guy Paul, and I'm all, hey, do you know any men's stags around here? I need to find a men's stag. And he goes, yeah, absolutely. He's all, there's this one over here. It's Tuesday night. It's over in Farragut area. I go, perfect. I go, here's my number. It's, let me get your number. And I said, I'll send you my number. Can you send me the link to it or whatever, or the information for that meeting? He said, absolutely. He's all, I'll send you a couple more too. So, and I tell that guy every time I see him now, right, at meetings, I'm like, man, I go, it's all your fault. It's all your fault that I'm connected here in this area with these meetings, these good meetings. And this Tuesday night meeting I go to is like every time I walk into the room, like before the first few times I started walking in that room, it was like, you know, not everybody knows your name, like cheers, right? But now when I walk in, like even Wild Bill, he's like, hey Tim, like I get a kick out of it, man. It's like, because these are some solid guys with some solid sobriety, and that's what I need to be around. You know, like I used to loiter in the parking lot. I used to loiter inside the meeting, not taking it seriously, and not having any hope that it was going to get better, right? Like, oh, it's not going to work. It hasn't worked, but I wasn't willing, I wasn't putting in the work, you know, I wasn't sticking my hand out. I'm like, well, they're not going to talk to me. I'm not going to talk to them either. Like that's not going to work, you know, stick your hand out, be a greeter at the front door, um, and watch some things happen, you know? So,
True
yeah.
story. I love that you call the men's a stag meeting. That's just I never thought of it that way, but it is. It's a stag meeting. You know.
So, well, that's what we call it in California. It's a stag meeting. That meeting back there is called Sicker Than Most. It's at 7 o'clock every Wednesday night. over in Arcadia, California, and that meeting that was really instrumental in my life. I mean, they had, one of those chickens you squeeze and it makes a noise, right? That's their mascot, you know. And they have a big one hanging in the room, like, and it works too. You can squeeze it and it'll squeal at you. So, but a lot of great men in that meeting, and that's why, like, I picked that men's stag, because that's what I need. You know what I mean? I need to be iron sharpens iron, and I needed to be around some men that they have some recovery. They have some sobriety, and so it's been really instrumental. I love that meeting. I love going to that meeting every Tuesday night. So
It's cool, brother. Well, is there anything you wanted to talk about that we haven't?
you know, no, I think I'm good. I appreciate everybody listening. I appreciate you. I'm really grateful, man, for you asking me to come on this podcast. Um, and I hope that, somebody listens to this and was like, you know what, it's absolutely helped somebody in their journey, you know. So thank you.
I think it will, and I appreciate you, Tim. You just got good mojo, man. You really do. You
Thank you.
do. I mean that. And but I can't let you go without doing our rapid fire questions.
All right.
No pressure, but are you ready, sir?
I'm ready.
All right. What is your favorite recovery slogan?
Oh, let's see. Mm, I would say live and let die. Is that what it is? No, no,
Live
live
and
and
let
let live.
live.
Yeah, live and let live.
I said, dang, Tim.
I was thinking of Guns N' Roses. Sorry, sorry.
Live and let live, people.
Yeah, yeah.
Now I'm really scared. What is your least favorite recovery slogan?
Oh,
Live and let die. No,
like
I'm just kidding.
no, 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 like back in the days, you used to hear about them say, "Just get in the car. Shut up and just get in the car." Like, yeah, that always pissed me off. Yeah, not knowing where I was going. Yeah, anxiety through the roof.
I can imagine. Yes. What do you think is your sobriety superpower?
My sobriety superpower. Hmm. Making good coffee.
I like it. If you could say one thing to your former self, what would it be?
Don't take everything so seriously. Rule number 62.
What song do you play to lift your spirits when you need a boost?
John Hopkins, Sit by the Fire.
If you could grant yourself one wish to help with your recovery, what would it be?
Um, Probably a fire pit in my backyard so I can bring people over to have a meeting.
I like that one. What step do you love the most?
The first step.
What step do you love the least?
The fourth.
What is one of your favorite movies?
Serendipity.
And finally, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Uh, uh, my faithful servant, you are welcome to come in.
I like it, man. Thank you so much, Tim, for taking the time to share your story, brother.
Absolutely.
It's been a lot of fun. It's been
Thank
a lot
you.
of
Yeah, it
fun.
was fun. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And for the rest of you out there, if this episode meant something to you, share it with one person who needs some hope today. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please take 30 seconds to leave a 5-star review. It helps this message reach someone who's still struggling. A new episode of The Cup of Joe Show drops every Thursday at noon. You can listen anytime at thecupofjoeshow.net or on one of your favorite podcast apps. Podbean, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and more. Just search for The Cup of Joe Show. Don't forget the "the." And if you're looking for daily encouragement in your recovery journey, subscribe to our friends at thedailyponderables.com, delivering inspiration straight to your inbox. Please like, follow, subscribe, and share because someone out there needs to hear this today.
It's just a laid-back vibe, baby.
We hope you enjoyed today's experience, strength, and hope. We are so grateful you decided to join us. Please share this episode with someone who might need it. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Remember, no matter where you are in your recovery journey, you are not alone. Reach up and reach out to someone. Please do not suffer in silence. Until next time, let's take it 1 minute, 1 hour, and 1 day at a time. Thanks for listening to The Cup of Joe Show.